Guys, today we're going to be making rough puff pastry. Ooh, thank you very much. We're going to be making rough puff pastry. Cheers. Shallots, they're like onions, only smaller. Well, because there's not, like, rough puff isn't sort of really a thing. What we're actually doing is making a really fat, heavy, and high hydration pastry. But the way that we make this thing puff is a process called lamination, okay? We'd make our base dough, and then we would laminate fat in between the layers, okay? That's a really good method, and obviously it's very nice for things like croissants and other sort of, where you really need that clear rise. You really got to make a traditional dough. That's a little bit more complicated. For what we're doing today, we're going to weigh out 4 ingredients, and I'm going to show you an incredibly simple system to make a very versatile pastry. Check it out. What we have here, it's a real recipe. They all are. So this is 250 grams of high gluten plain flour. So for this, we really want the gluten because the gluten is what lets it puff and get all flaky. If it doesn't do anything, what's the fucking point? We have 250 grams of butter, equal quantities butter and flour. For short crust pastry, absolutely, you will go half butter to flour. This is a really high fat content for pastry. We have 150 mils of cold water. We might not need all of that. We're gonna go in a couple of thirds, but we've got it here. And as always, we have sea salt. So I always use delicious salt, okay? We're gonna sift our flour. With pastry, this is important. We wanna get rid of any little lumps. Check there's no bits of crap in there, all that sort of stuff. We're going to add a pinch sea salt. Our butter is tempered. It's not melted. It's not to the point where it's separating. You're looking at about 38 degrees where it starts to actually separate out. So you've got to keep it under there. I've had this on the bench for about 15 to 20 minutes. When we say rough puff, this is really not a very pretty pastry to begin with. What we want are flecks of butter through our pastry. They're the flaky spots, basically, if you think of it that way. And we're going to I don't want to keep saying rough, very quickly rub them in. So whilst we don't want to melt the butter by overworking it, and obviously you're 38 degrees, or at the very least you're supposed to be. So if you're rubbing and working the butter, eventually you will melt it. We want to be sort of quick with this part, but also we don't have to be very precise. This isn't like when we do our short crust or our sweet short crust, where we have to be a little bit more accurate in what we're doing. As soon as this is most of the way incorporated, let's call it half. We're going to go in with 2/3 of our water here. Working this now to form a dough. So we can turn it out on the bench. So you'll see it doesn't look very pretty. It doesn't look very pastry-like. This is more than enough water. So you see how soft that is? That's totally fine. We don't need to add any more than that. So that was probably only about 120, 110 in there really for this one. The temperature of your butter and how quickly you get that in there is also gonna have a difference as well. And if you have a higher gluten content to your flour, it will also absorb more water. So don't be worried if yours takes all 150, if it only needs 90, it's totally cool. What we're gonna do now is leave this to rest for 15 minutes in the fridge to try to firm some of that butter back up after we've warmed it with our fingers. And we're gonna come back, I'm gonna show you the next step. Our pastry has been in the fridge for 15 minutes now. Very good. Lightly flour, just a little bit. You might not need to, it depends how tacky your dough is. We're just gonna give this another knead now that it's had a chance to rest. And we're just gonna knead it now until it starts to come together and looks much smoother than it did before, okay? Now we're gonna get this into a nice shape. What we're gonna perform now is called a book turn, okay? The reason that we call it rough is because we've just mixed everything together and we're now gonna add lamination. We're gonna add layers inside our dough and roll them out, just like with our pasta dough. When it cooks, that's what's gonna give it the lift. Because of the hydration and because of the fat, that's gonna make steam inside the dough as it cooks, and that's what's gonna make it flaky and delicious. Obviously, if we didn't have the butter in here that we had now, and we just had a piece of butter that was all flat and thin the way they would in a bakery, you'd roll this out, then put a piece of butter in there, and then fold it over. Then you'd be rolling and maintaining a very clear layer of butter inside, and that's how you get the spring, as it were, like the oven spring for things like Danish and croissants and, you know, things that have to be very, very particular. For, you know, things like the tops of your pies and for your sausage rolls, this kind of dough is absolutely fine. It's all good. But as always, I like to tell you why we're doing what we're doing. We just want to keep working it around on the bench. Now for this, we really want to roll it into a rectangle before we perform our turn. Roll it out. As square as we can keep this now, the better, so that it's nice and even when we come to fold it over. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come over and fold this one to a third, fold this one to a third, push down just like that, and that is our first turn. Now we're going to give it 15 more minutes. It's been 15 minutes. We're going to turn our pastry again. We're doing the exact same thing, guys. Exactly the same. Little bit of flour, feeding the chooks. So all we have to do this time is to make sure that we're preserving the layers that we've just worked to put into our dough. See this little pocket of pastry, this little bit of butter here? That's wonderful. That's really lovely. That's what we want to be seeing. And we're going to go 1, 2, push it down again, and then we rest it for another 15 minutes. It's the final roll. After this, you can do whatever you like. You can obviously make this in larger batches and freeze. It's totally okay. Rolling, rolling. Look how smooth and beautiful it is. Beautiful, that looks great. That looks really good. I'm sure, again, like there's probably pastry chefs out there just like, dude, that looks terrible, but I tried, so don't judge me, all right? And this is our rough puff pastry, all ready to go. This is my sausage roll mix. I have 500 grams of pork mince. I have some onion, some celery, and some carrot, which I can show you a really efficient way to get those cut up in another video as well. Some toasted fennel seed, as well as some chili flakes, some rosemary, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of vinegar, and we're gonna bind it with an egg. In a pot here on the stove, I've just started with a little bit of oil. Oh, these beautifully diced onions. Oh my. We're gonna sweat down our onions, carrots, celery with the seeds and some rosemary. All we want to be doing here is just taking the rawness off the vegetables and adding a little bit of sweetness to our total mix, okay? Always we're going with a pinch of salt in the beginning. I'm gonna go with some butter, some rosemary, some fennel. As always, important to note, you can do this with any flavors that you enjoy, any meats you like. You can make this meat-free, you can do whatever you like. We're looking nice in there. I'm gonna go in with the sugar and I'm gonna go in with some vinegar. So now that vinegar's in there, we don't wanna make it too hot. I don't wanna scorch it and I don't wanna just disappear and have it just go dry. This mix I'm now gonna put into the fridge. We're gonna let this cool down before we whip it up with our pork, and I'll show you the next step for making our sausage rolls. This is all chilled down now, okay? So, very simple. I'm going to peel and grate an apple. I peel it because the little bits of the skin aren't good getting stuck in your teeth later on down the line, and through the grater just because it's easier. And then we're going to whip the mix and we're going to enjoy a little spritz. Clean, very, very clean. We really need to be whipping this mix and making sure that the fat and the liquid is all emulsifying. You know when you bite into a sausage roll and it's really just crumbly mince, it's not actually sausage. So that's actually from this step here and not really whipping and binding it enough, and that's what the egg's gonna help with. You've really just gotta be working this yourself. Unless you have a KitchenAid or something, you could chuck it in the KitchenAid. But we wanna be getting this nice and smooth and consistent. I'm gonna go in with a large whack of salt, big crushed pepper. You can put anything else you like in here. Beautiful mix, absolutely lush. Now this is gonna have a little rest in the fridge. And then I'm going to show you how to roll out our sausage rolls using our wonderful house-made Humble Onion's Own rough puff pastry. So we have here a 1 times batch of our rough puff pastry we're going to roll our pastry into basically one long rectangle. So what we're going to do now is take some of our mix and we're going to line it this side of the middle, because when we roll over, we really want to carry the mix with us. Get it looking quite sausagey, chef. I have some beaten egg. It's really just about making a little bit of glue to help this stick, okay? And now we're going to roll this towards ourselves. We'll lock this off down here. I'm gonna come through and brush this. All over, all on the back, you know? Forking our clothes nice and sealed here, okay? It's exceptional sausage roll. So I'm just gonna come through now and just pierce on the top here, because obviously there is still air inside the sausage roll. We don't want to explode, basically. Trim. I'm just gonna put a really light layer of oil on here, and then I'm gonna add some Nigella seeds to the top of mine. You can add any flavorings you want. So now we're just gonna chuck this in the oven. It's probably gonna need about 30 minutes at about 170 degrees. As always, we're really gonna be checking for the cookedness of our meat and the doneness of our pastry, but you do wanna go in relatively high because we really wanna kick that pastry off. Guys, I'll see you in half an hour. The timer's gone off. Our beautiful sausage roll is looking incredible. Look at this pastry. Look at the flakiness of this rough puff pastry. Should we cut into this? Beautiful. Fantastic. And then just a bit of the best tomato sauce in the world, Rosella. Man, it's really good. That is fantastic. Humble shallots. The episode is little, but the host is not. Thank you guys. Always love. Shallots, they're like onions, only smaller.